Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Chair, for the introduction. So today I present to you in the capacity of student and not so much a central banker. I present to you my thesis on, well, elements of my thesis on the knowledge economy. In this paper in particular, I develop a framework for human capital development. And this framework is also in support of a pivot to the knowledge economy. So the structure of the presentation is as follows. The regular research paper format with the introduction, where I motivate the topic, go through all the research questions, the stylized facts, discuss the literature, methodology results, and then conclude with some policy prescriptions. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has benefited under the nurturing arms of the energy sector for more than 100 years. Over the years, Trinidad and Tobago would have invested in public infrastructures, public health, ICT infrastructure, and more so education. Trinidad and Tobago would have introduced the government assistance for tertiary expenses in 2004. Now, this program would have extended this stock of knowledge in terms of the individuals benefiting from tertiary level education. In fact, tertiary level participation would have moved from 2% in 2005 to 15% in 2015. Now, despite the investment in human capital, Trinidad and Tobago has faced some challenges in terms of unlocking this investment that it has made in its human capital. When we look at the data, we see that when we look at the productivity data as well as the data on economic growth, we see that growth has been more or less marginal, right? Productivity also has been marginal, and therefore there is a need for us to re-examine our macroeconomic model so as to unlock this growth potential that is housed in the minds of our population, and in doing so, we hope that with this framework that is presented, that we can transition our economy into a knowledge-based economy. The knowledge-based economy is expected to fill the gap that exists in terms of the labor market. It is expected to improve the challenges that we may face in terms of competitiveness, ease of doing business, as well as our regulatory environment. So, with that being said, right, this paper in particular develops a framework for us to mobilize human capital and support a pivot to the knowledge economy. So as a result, the following research questions are advanced. How can we mobilize human capital to increase economic growth and development and transition our economy into a knowledge-based economy? What is TNT's level of readiness for the knowledge economy? And what are TNT's strengths and weaknesses in the knowledge economy? We now turn to the stylized facts. So before I would have discussed, some of the benefits that the GATE program would have provided to the economy, right? And the investment in GATE would have resulted in shifts in employment along the various skills category. What we see is that there was an increase in employment in the level 4 skills category, which speaks to the highest skills level on the skills continuum. So it would deal with legislators and professionals and so on in the area. And what we see that over the period 2012 to 2023 as well, there has been some decline in employment within the level 1, 2, and 3 skills category, which are your lower levels of skills category. But however, noticeably in the chart between 2022 and 2023, we saw some slight upticks, right? So the this so increases in our investment in human capital basically would have also translated into improvements in our human capital index. And we also see that this has been positively related with our per capita GDP, right? And we see that in chart 2. Now, despite a more educated workforce and so on as a result of our investment in human capital, we see that productivity has been marginal, it has been stagnated, and also growth as well, our indicator of economic growth as well has also sort of mirrored this sort of low growth, no growth kind of pattern that we see happening. But however, what I wouldn't want to mention based on the chart is that somewhere around 2021 or so, with the intensification of digitalization, right, the UNDP would have accredited this significant increase in productivity as a result of some of our advances in human capital, right? Now, what we're saying, so we're saying that per capita GDP productivity growth has been low despite increases in our level of human capital, right? Also, when we look at our indicators of innovation, right, we see that when we look at the filing of patents and grants and so on, we see that it is just a handful in comparison to when we look at non-residents, somewhat telling us something about our education system, how we move from research to commercialization and so on. And as a result of that, it is something that we need to look into. We now turn to the literature. Now, the literature on the knowledge economy is quite replete. I would say that there are some patches in between, right? The literature, as it speaks to the decisive role of knowledge in economic growth and development, it is demonstrated throughout time. If we go back to, let's say, the Neolithic period where man were hunter-gatherers, right? It is with the acquisition of knowledge, man would have transformed from hunter-gatherers to farmers to artisans, and then we had the Renaissance explosion, which gave birth to the whole industrial revolution with the development of the steam engine, and then we fast forward to the information age where we have the advent of the internet, and then we fast forward now to industrialization 4.0, which speaks to big data, the use of artificial and intelligence and so on. We see that knowledge has always been at the core of these advances. As it pertains to the literature, right, several notable studies form the foundation for this whole knowledge economy discussion. For example, John Stuart Mill's, right, Lewis, where he looked at the unlimited supplies of labor, Mankiw, Roma, and Wheel, and so on. Now, in the literature as well, there are also several frameworks that sort of acts as guide to guide countries as they transition to knowledge economies, right? We have the specific to this research, we have the World Bank Knowledge Assessment Methodology, which emphasizes the 4 pillars of the knowledge economy. Then we have the Works Foundation Ideopolis Framework, which underscores the role of education and research institution in generating new ideas and a skilled workforce and so on. And then closer to home, Leon 2012, who had this vision for CARICOM. This vision he entitled it KIDS, which stands for Knowledge Accumulation, Innovation, Diagnostics, and Strategies. This vision was to promote a knowledge-focused Caribbean economy, And this framework is the framework that this augmented kids framework, which this paper develops, discusses, and draws upon. So the knowledge accumulation, innovation, diagnostics, and strategies framework is what I would have used to develop an augmented framework. And this augmented kids framework stands for knowledge accumulation and utilization, because we can accumulate and not utilize, right? Industrialization, redesign, given emphasis on the fact that our economic model within itself has emphasized resource extraction and, to a lesser extent, innovation, and therefore there is a need for us to now engage in homegrown innovation, right? So apart from so that's the I, development with international partners. We can't do it alone. Caribbean small island developing states are characterized by having very limited domestic capital. There is a need for us to partner with our regional as well as international institutions. And then we have service internationalization, giving recognition to the fact that we are now operating in a digital era. And well, the literature also discusses some of the country cases, what are some of the success factors, the pitfalls, and so on that may exist. In the interest of time, though, I would move on from the literature review. I now turn to the methodology. Now, in terms of the methodology, I would have adopted a mixed method triangulation approach, where I would have first utilized the Works Foundation Ideopolis framework to evaluate Trinidad and Tobago's strengths and weaknesses in the knowledge economy. Then I would have developed a knowledge economy index in order to determine TNT's readiness, where it is at in terms of the knowledge economy. And thirdly, the application of an econometric framework, which in this case is a VAR framework, just to show how how Trinidad and Tobago would perform if there is a shock in our knowledge economy index, and how does this impact economic growth. So just to kind of further explain some of these things, in terms of the Work Foundation Ideopolis framework, this framework basically was, it is part of the Nordic framework. Most Nordic countries utilize this framework. It's really applied to cities. Ideo, German for idea, polis, German for city, so the city of ideas. And this framework basically, there are 6 major drivers of the Ideopolis framework, where it looks at the level of knowledge intensity, niche strengths in different industries, center of city region, distinctive offering, whether there is vibrant university, skilled workers. So we utilize these drivers to assess Trinidad and Tobago level of knowledge intensity and its strengths and weaknesses and so on in the knowledge economy. Additionally, what was done to add further credence to this piece of work, sample survey methodology involving in-depth interviews were utilized, and this was to garner information from subject matter experts and so on. Right? Investigator triangulation was adopted in the research process to add further credence. Then in terms of discussing the approach in which it was done, we utilized a Delphi method with a combination of snowballing in order to reach out to these subject matter experts. In terms of the construction of the knowledge economy index, a 4-step approach was adopted to construct the knowledge economy index. This involves selecting, normalizing, weighting, and aggregating our variables and so on. Right? We did utilize some PCA in order to do some sensitivity analysis. Right? And in terms of the construction of the knowledge economy index comprises of 4 components, 11 pillars, 35 sub-pillars. Right, the 4 components of the knowledge economy, quite similar to the global knowledge economy index, as well as the World Bank knowledge assessment methodology. We have the economy and institution, which looks at the the regulatory environment, whether it's an enabling environment and so on. Then we have education, which speaks about the input, output, outcome, and so on of your education system. We have research and innovation, which again also looks at research inputs and outputs and so on. And then we have your science and technology component, which inside there is your ICT, infrastructure, and so on. So in terms of the vector autoregressive model, well, we utilize a knowledge economy index, which within itself comprise, as I'm not sure if I previously mentioned it, but a total of 61 variables. Now, so given this total number of variables, I mean, to regress this now with other variables, we were limited in scope, right? But just to basically demonstrate whether shocks to your knowledge economy index within itself results in any sort of improvement in economic growth, we would have regressed your knowledge economy index. So growth would have been regressed on your knowledge economy index. We have a fiscal variable, we have a monetary policy variable, and then we also have our WTI prices inside of there. And we would have utilized this framework here in order to do that. So we now turn to the results. So in terms of the Ideopolis framework, though, in terms of knowledge intensity, we see that Trinidad and Tobago has significant amount of knowledge intensity. Right? The country exceeds the Work Foundation benchmark of having more than 25% knowledge intensity. In our case, the calculation was about 79%. 20% of its workforce with level 4 education. In this case, we had about 45%. And then in terms of the 15% of its occupations as senior legislators, officials, and managers, we were 12%. So we underperformed in that area. In terms of a vibrant education sector, Trinidad and Tobago has inclusive access to education. We have local and foreign institutions present in the country. They have met the needs of society, and we see that in terms of their work program and so on to deal with the information age, they are adding programs such as masters and so on in AI and all of these different things. So they are adapting to our changing environment. When we look at our distinctive knowledge city offer, Trinidad and Tobago has significant distinctiveness, its economic significance. It's based on oil and gas production. The country possesses a rich cultural identity. All of these things are very important for our tourism product, our tourism offering. We're known for carnival. We are also known for its steel pan and all of these different things. And if we go around the region, we can identify a number of different distinctive offering that every one of our countries in the region can provide. The diverse specialization, Trinidad and Tobago is principally an oil and gas province. It has some clear economic strengths. It is home to a number of multinational corporations with strong economic ties, commitment to the energy sector, and so on, as well as we have a local non-oil manufacturing sector with strong presence in the Caribbean region. Now, one thing that I think I must say about the Ideopolis framework is, in terms of doing it, it reminded me of the Caribbean region and how we can regard CARICOM as this principal Ideopolis, and then we have all the countries in the region acting as secondary Ideopolis, creating an entire region of knowledge excellence and so on. I find this framework quite fitting for the Caribbean region. In terms of the knowledge economy index, right, in the interest of time, I would just discuss the movement between 2022 and 2023. What we see is that Trinidad and Tobago would have performed above the 40th percentile in terms of the knowledge economy index for 2023. 44.7. This compares to a knowledge economy index of 45.4 in 2022. We see some slight underperformance. When we go behind the data, we notice that there are some underperformance in terms of the educational infrastructure, economy, and institutional and scientific. And if we go further behind the data, we see that things like increases in debt and all of these different things, ease of doing business and whatnot, is what actually resulted in this underperformance. And then when we look at the VAR, what we see is that, well, shock to your knowledge economy index results in an improvement in economic growth. This improvement is about 0.08% or 8 basis points increases. And well, of course, the VAR we would have looked at model robustness and all these different things, right? Turning towards the augmented skills framework, which is basically the bulk or the crux of the paper, right? This 4-pillar framework, knowledge accumulation and utilization. I want to kind of discuss what it means, right? And I'm out of time. So with that, thank you for the courtesy of your attention, and I look forward to any comments, questions.
Eric?
Thank you. I'd like to compliment Endo with the thorough research supporting his vision transforming the Trinidad and Tobago economy into a knowledge-based economy. This vision is based on the need to diversify the economy for long-term sustainable growth, which is still heavily reliant on oil and gas production. In addition, the climate change-driven global energy transition from fossil fuels to sustainable energy sources makes that the current economic model of Trinidad and Tobago is gradually becoming obsolete. Your research on a transition of Trinidad and Tobago to a knowledge-based economy uses a three-pronged approach. You called it triangular. So that was the application of the Ideopolis framework to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses and capacity to generate knowledge-intensive activities, the development of the knowledge economy index to evaluate the TNT's performance on the indicators of the knowledge economy, and finally the VAR model to demonstrate how strengthening the pillars linked to the knowledge economy can improve overall growth performance of the economy. Your analysis of the research of the Ideopolis framework shows that Trinidad and Tobago has a high capacity to generate knowledge-intensive activities. The knowledge-intensive economic activity to total economic activity was 79%. It's 3 times the benchmark. The workforce is highly educated, 2 times the benchmark of 20%. And only the occupations by highly educated professionals to total occupations underperformed with 12% compared to the 15% benchmark. Also considering the Ideopolis drivers, progress is in various stages of development, but only on the political will and government leadership towards a knowledge economy, you seem rather pessimistic. You put a lot of effort in developing a composite knowledge economy index. You showed that 61 variables were included in a composite index, which is quite impressive. The results show that Trinidad and Tobago scores low to medium on its knowledge economy index in terms of generating, adopting, and disseminating knowledge. And the index also shows a declining trend that I see in your figure 6 and also in the graph that you showed in your presentation. This brings me to my first 2 questions. First, the graph. I was curious what explains the jump in the index from 2016 to 2017. And more in general about the framework and the knowledge economy indicator. How do you explain the rather low value of the knowledge economy index compared to the high capacity to generate knowledge-intensive activities of the Trinidad and Tobago economy, which follows from the Ideopolis framework? Education plays a pivotal role in the transition to a knowledge economy, but there were some statements in your paper that puzzled me, and I just mention a few. You stated, as such, the domestic education system reflects a system that is unsupportive of innovation and creative thinking, which is required to spur innovation and out-of-the-box inventions. To me, it sounds contradictory if you look to the success of the CATE program. So I wondered, is the education system unsupportive, or is it a lack of government support for entrepreneurs to translate their innovative ideas in marketable products and services? Another statement was the CATE program, though successful in expanding access to tertiary education, has inadvertently contributed to a surplus of graduates whose potential are presently untapped. You also showed that employment in occupational skills category 4, that is high educated professionals, seems to have stabilized in recent years. That was in figure 1 of your paper. You also mentioned the low number of patents filed by Trinidad and Tobago residents. And you mentioned that better educated workforce did not translate in productivity growth. If you look at all those developments, I wondered, did these developments contribute to some kind of brain drain in Trinidad and Tobago? Then some additional questions. Is there already a nationwide vision on the transition to a knowledge economy? What is your estimation of how long it will take to transfer Trinidad and Tobago into a knowledge economy? And then I mean a knowledge economy index score above 70. And should government play a prominent role in the transition to a knowledge economy, or should it be private sector led with a facilitating role by the government? And I want to close my comments with that you conclude in your paper with a very sensible list of policy recommendations, but I was missing one important one. A knowledge economy is data-driven, and you mentioned that you encountered data challenges constructing the knowledge economy indicator. So in this respect, I think it's also important to add that investment in availability of complete and recent data by the Central Statistical Office is also a recommendation you should consider. So I'm looking forward to your reaction on my comments, and thank you.
Andel, you got quite a bit of questions. I don't expect you to answer all now, but try your best.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning again, everyone. So thank you very much for your comments. They are very thought-provoking, as well as your questions are quite intense, and I guess we may definitely need to have a discussion after.
Okay, we can do it at lunch.
Yeah, and also if you could send them to me so that I could incorporate them in my paper, I would appreciate that. But and to start with your very the very first, to start with your last question, where you would have suggested inclusion of the knowledge economy requiring, you know, a data-driven environment. I agree with you 100%, and I would definitely include that within the piece of research in terms of who would lead the initiative, whether it's government or private sector and so on. The idea is for a sort of triple helix sort of framework in order for this to happen. So I'm thinking that the government could lead the charge, but definitely we need both the private sector as well as civil society involvement in the process. So I would say that the chores would be shared, or at least it should be shared with the government being the main driver. In terms of how long, in terms of the transition to a knowledge economy, I really don't think that I can give a number in terms of the number of years for a transition to a knowledge economy. But what I would say is that I think that one of the recommendations stemming out of the paper is the fact that we need to develop a knowledge economy task force, you know, housed in the Ministry of Planning and Development. And I think that, you know, part of the duties of that task force should be, you know, the implementation of, you know, 5-year knowledge-based economy action plan or a strategic plan in order to achieve certain things with, you know, measurable, you know, with smart objectives then in terms of, I guess, reaching, let's say, for example, a high knowledge economy index score within a particular time frame. I think that's the intention behind it. In terms of the brain drain, the data on brain drain is really not available, so I was unable to really assess it, but there is a brain drain problem. Our housing and population census goes back, it's dated 2011. So definitely we are unable to assess, the whole brain drain impact and so on, because we have also experienced brain gain with a lot of brain gain, sorry, with a lot of persons entering the country as well, and in this case, Venezuelan migrants and so on. And based on the International Organization migration data, a lot of these persons have level 4 education and above, which is secondary education level and above. So I mean, while there may be brain drain, there is also brain gain, but the data is not available to do a thorough assessment.
Yeah, Andel, you're starting to lose the audience. Lunch.
All right.
So
Yeah,
that
but
concludes
yeah.
the first session. You can answer all the questions, provide all the answers over lunch. Definitely, I got some additional questions that I didn't have time to respond to, but you could do that over lunch. Lunch is served. Congratulate the presenters and the discussions for the first opening session. I think it was wonderful. Got some good comments and excellent presentation.